All right, welcome to the NYVR Dev group. So I'm filling in for John Oquist, who runs the group. He got tied up today, and we have an amazing lineup, all in the 360 side of things, and I appreciate everyone for coming. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things. So we have a couple of NYVR regular events coming up. The themes have been defined. It's architectural, engineering, and construction for March, gaming, May, and marketing and advertising in June. So check those out. Two other things, part of more of the bigger NYVR group. Actually, how many people, this is your first time being here? Raise your hand, please. Awesome. Welcome, welcome. So as part of the NYVR group, I run two programs. One is a collaboration group, and one is the DEEP program, which is the Developer Equipment Evaluation Program. So for a collaboration group, we take names after the presentations. I just have a laptop, and I take people's backgrounds and what they're interested in, and I can kind of team them up with people with complementary skill sets and set them off to create a project. And it's a way to network and also start the process of creating great content. So if you're interested in participating in that, just come on up, sign up to spreadsheet, and I'll team up with hopefully other great developers. Second thing is the DEEP program is we get amazing pieces of equipment from manufacturers that we then loan out for free to developers to try out for the month. And at the end of the month, they do a little write-up, which we give back to the manufacturers. Any content that they get gets shared, and it's a really great program. So we have the Vuz camera, Kodak, SPK 360, we have a structure sensor, we have a sub pack, and thanks to Dario over there, Dario's with HCC. Does everyone know Dario? So we now have a Vive to loan out.
Nice. Vive Pro?
No. Dario, get us on the list. So we do have a Vive. So we have two assistant organizers that typically manage it. Their names are Beatrice and Yuki. They're tied up tonight. So I'm also going to be taking names for that. So if you're interested in any of that equipment, we'll put you in the queue and get you going. I think that's really it. Last thing, Howard, why don't you come on up? Or, so Howard is with the Glimpse Group, my company, and we actually could use some help with some developers. So he's just going to spend a quick second.
Sure. Yeah. So like, as he said, at the Glimpse Group, we're a holding company of startups in AR and VR, kind of a startup ourselves as well. And we actually have a few projects from our consulting arm as well as some of our subsidiaries that are actually picking up steam and will probably need, definitely in some cases and probably in some need, some additional support, both in artists and developers. Currently, probably it's best fit for students or junior folks or folks who are doing other stuff and are getting their feet wet in this and want to try it out, only because it's not yet, these aren't senior competitive salary things yet. There's opportunities to make some cash or possibly some options and or possibly royalties depending on the situation and depending on your skill sets. If you think you're all better than that and kind of want to tell us the story of why we might want to consider another arrangement, we want to talk about that too, because we also have ongoing stuff. And certainly any of this kind of introductory work that you get involved in, there'll be some sort of compensation, and as we need more people to grow on, it'll be a good chance for us to see who could do what. So if that fits you, or if it fits someone you know, or you just want to talk and understand more, it really is a great opportunity to work on real stuff and potentially part of something that's going to be huge soon, we like to think. So I could stop talking. I put all my contact information there, just holaraiken@glimpsegroup.com, and I'll be here now and afterwards. So definitely think about it. There's opportunities right away, and definitely more in the near future. Thanks.
All right, and when you get a chance after the presentations, please start adding some things on my favorite VR experiences, because I really like to check out what people are enjoying. I think with that, we have an amazing lineup of speakers who have such knowledge, and Chris has presented before and really he's kind of scratched the surface, and they always have awesome stuff. So come on down. Chris from Adobe and Meta. Actually, this one will work. Yeah, you can use that.
So, cheese. And we'll talk about this little contraption later. So my name's Chris. I come from a little company originally called Metal. Some of you may know of it or the brand Skybox or not. Anybody know of it?
Oh, yeah. Come on.
Okay, good. How many of you have already done some 360? This will just help me situate and sort of like skew this presentation the right way. So it looks like about half and half. How many of you are developers here? Like C coders, C++, looking, okay, that's good too. Okay, so I'll try to, if I don't have time in the half hour to talk on the Adobe SDKs, grab me, pull me aside, I'll show you some very, very interesting things on that side. Excuse me. So yeah, my name's Chris. I come from a little company called Metal. We developed some very interesting solutions for 360 VR production called Skybox. We come from content creation. I actually started my life as an art director, believe it or not, and a creative director in advertising agencies. Got very fed up with that in about 6 years and instead decided to serve that industry. As a facilitator, we supply creative services and production services. When you're supplying production services, part of what you'll do is try to differentiate yourself, try to make more money. Money's good, that's our friend. And as a result of that, we started to build plugins in 1996. Let's fast forward to about 2008. Adobe approached us and asked us if we would bundle some of these plugins that we did. We said absolutely, because we were looking to go from a service business more into an IP or product company. By the way, I have an art and business background, so you'll understand why this split personality and why I vacillate back and forth. And they both have to live in this body very, very well. So yeah, I said yes, absolutely. Honored. We bundled with After Effects for a couple of years. That encouraged us. We started building more products. Let's fast forward to roughly 3.5 years ago. One of our agency clients came to us and said, hey, help with some 360. I said, what is 360? What? Go away. Why are you looking at me? Please, I'm ready to retire. I'm not interested in this. No, I'm just joking. They're good. They were a very, very good customer. I don't even like to call them a customer. I think of them more as a partner. They were there from the get-go, like 1992. They had our back, we had theirs. There was no way I was going to let them down. Long story short, let's move through this a bit. So long story short, we launched some products that we'll talk about a bit. It helps narrative in particular. It did deal with technical issues that came with 360 VR, but mostly, in my opinion, it's because it helped drive narrative in 360 VR. That's why they did very well. The other claim to fame to the products and why we got the attention of the community, I think one of the big reasons is that if you understood and knew how to work with After Effects and Premiere Pro, we basically let you keep working the way you were working. We took care of all the 360-ness in the background. So I'm going to try to tell you the story in 3 acts, where we were, where we are, and where we're going at Adobe. So we sold the IP about 7 months ago. Metal, to be clear, Metal still exists, it's still running. We only bought certain IP. So in my mind, it's all has to do with core functionality for 360 VR and eventually immersive content down the road. Whatever is left over at Metal is not meant to compete with the Adobe products. We're doing foundational work. We're encouraging all third-party developers, including anybody in this room that's interested, to layer on top of what we're doing. So that's basically where that relationship is. So I still own half the company, but I work full-time, and believe me, that's full-time with a big F and a big T. At Adobe, I can barely keep up. There's a lot to do there. So I committed for 3 years. We'll see where it goes after that. Fair enough? Now I'm called Director of Immersive, but I get to have all the fun. That's the reality. So let's go back again in time. This is what got my attention the most. So that project, that agency that came up to us and said, hey, 360. And once I started studying and looking at it, because branded content is about telling a story. It's not about an experiential roller coaster ride or sticking a camera in this room and crossing your fingers and hoping something interesting will happen. That's not the way the ad world works. So that caught what happened there is that I quickly realized that the frame or the screen in front of you becomes the world around you. So what we used to depend on, our friend, the frame or the screen is gone. What do you do now? What happens now? How do you deal with that? How do you keep the attention of the viewer? There's many ways. If you're in Hollywood, Bollywood, if you're in ad production, you've got the luxury of money, certainly. In some cases, time, not so much in the ad world. But you can orchestrate, you can block, you can choreograph, you can do things that'll influence the gaze and make sure that you can cut, do transitions, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens in journalism? Not so much, right? So I found it very intriguing because I found it a great challenge and a great opportunity to basically, we have the chance to reinvent storytelling as we know it, because the medium lends itself to this. It's fantastic for that. A good example of that. This is how my kids watch TV or film. And then they're doing something else on the computer. Here we're obstructing the world. We're giving the content a better chance. So anybody who complains to me about how difficult it is to produce or create stories for immersive content, I say you're full of shit. I don't buy that for a second. If you're a great storyteller, in my opinion, let's take all this tech aside and just put it by the wayside for a second. If I'm a great storyteller, I can sit here with Bill and I can take him to Mars, I can take him to subterranean places, I can take him to parallel universes. If I deliver well and I have a great story and I know how to do it properly, I don't need any tech. If I suck at it, he's paying attention to somebody else. So in my opinion, a lot of this technology helps us. It's become a bit of a perfect storm where hardware, software solutions are coming together and making it much more accessible, much easier to produce content, in my opinion. So that's what really, so the artist in me got completely intrigued in that. The business person in me, this is DK2 era, when we had to make a decision. So Oculus DK2 era, the businessman in me said, 2 billion, Facebook, Oculus, that's interesting, but I'm not betting the farm on that. When we delivered that 360 piece, we found out that it was YouTube that was supporting 360. That's where that content was going to. So now you have two big giants pitted against each other. That was 3.5 years ago, almost 4. Now we have 5 or 6 platforms pitted against each other. So I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And we can talk about that further if you want one-on-one. So as I said, we have on an artistic side, there's no rules. In my mind, there's no rules. It's a great time. It's tabula rasa, or it's a clean slate, and it's a great opportunity for us to create the vocabulary. This is wonderful. So this is just not me preaching it. I actually fucking believe it. Okay? So, excuse me. To that point. Andrew, does that look familiar? So where we started, this is Andrew, by the way. So I'm good at embarrassing people. So Andrew from NYVR will talk in the next little while. This is Andrew's rig. This is one of his early rigs. This is some fisheye. This is a bicycle part. This is gaffer tape. I think he put some spit, some glue, and I know he's got a prayer in there because he's like.
A lot of hair left.
What year was that?
There's Andrew.
What year was that? What year was that?
That was 2015. Yeah, or spring of 2015.
So this is the spirit of where a lot of this industry started. DIY solutions, people are just finding a way. I did a great talk at Intel at Sundance, and I was quoted as saying, I paraphrased Jeff Goldblum from the Jurassic Park film, his character, as saying, artists always find a way. This is very, very indicative of that. Right? So the equivalent of your madness, sir, is my madness. Okay, so that's what my comp files looked like when we first delivered that first project. There were no products to deliver. This is hacking in After Effects. It's miserable, it's slow, but we delivered. It was just I look at that file now and I can't even decipher half the shit I did.
Node-based?
Well, you've got a node display in After Effects. It doesn't really work. Mantra works in nodes, by the way. And I'll talk about that. So from this madness and this madness, we are at this and beyond. So my DIY became the Skybox products. The camera started to get a lot more accessible. This is just a very quick sampling. Some of these are already dead. I should refresh this, but you can see more and more and more. So for those who haven't done 360 at all, a very quick lesson on this one. It all started with action cameras. No, that's not true. The most recent incarnation started with action cameras. It's usually an array of 6. I color code them, so you can see there's 6 points of view. People started putting together in arrays, right? So the idea is shoot front, left, right, top, bottom, back, stitch it together as one asset that you then put into this format, this weird looking thing. This is called equirectangular. It's the format that's been adopted so far, and it's pretty much a standard. It is definitely not the most efficient standard format out there, and that'll probably change in time. So think of this as much like what we see the Earth, a flat rendition of the Earth, a map of the Earth. If you look at Antarctica on the bottom, it's completely out of proportion. As soon as you wrap it back onto a sphere, it goes back into proportion because the deformation happens properly, right? So that, uploaded to YouTube or put into a player in the Oculus Rift, becomes a sphere. You live in the middle of that sphere, you look around you, and you see what you see. So even though we've got 4K or more of resolution, what you really only see is a very small portion of that over time, right? So that sort of accounts for the more sophisticated or spoiled eyes, as I call them, why some people are not happy with the resolution in the screen, because we're already looking at 4K in our living room. So the comparison is made no matter what. So as time goes by, we'll move to 8K and beyond. But that presents problems too. We'll talk about it. So equirectangular, standard, wrapped up into a globe. You live in the middle of that globe, limited view on the right. This is abstract and it's fun and it's nice, but this is what it really parlays to in real life, right? So the 6 views come together to form this asset. That becomes a globe. You see portions of that globe or that sphere at a time as you're navigating, right? I talked on formats. We already support quite a few formats. We'll support more as time goes by, both monoscopic and stereoscopic. I think the one that'll win the day is probably something like this for now. That'll be the natural evolution because it's very efficient.
Why?
Because look at the sheer size of this thing compared to the...
So you're gonna have to produce in this?
We can convert it. We can already convert it already. And geek speak, one of the things and one of the reasons I joined Adobe is all these conversions are very destructive. And so they lend themselves to longer rendering times, and the pixels are processed way, way too much. We're implementing some stuff right down at the pipeline that will just make it faster and cleaner. You won't even see it. So these are the kind of things that I'll be doing at Adobe, things that you don't even really see, but you'll feel them, and you'll certainly benefit from them, hopefully, with your role. Right? So, where we started, roller coaster rides. Wonderful. I would never have gotten involved in this industry if it was roller coaster rides. Sorry, but there's just too many out there. There's no real challenge for me. From where we were to where we are today, projects like Dunkirk, I like to showcase these projects because it breaks a lot of notions or preconceived notions that people have about 360 VR production, like you have to have a 6-camera array, or a jaunt, or a this, or a that, or what's that magic camera that's one size fits all. There's no such, there never was and there never will be. So Dunkirk is a very good example of that. Here's a bit of a behind the scenes on that. Hopefully we have audio.
I think so.
Dunkirk is a very personal project for Christopher Nolan. He puts you right on that beach at this incredible moment in history. And it's a story that really lends itself to virtual reality.
Christopher Nolan is a big dreamer. He likes to push boundaries. I think that innovation is in our DNA, and the most innovative storytelling medium is virtual reality.
Taking a vision as big as Dunkirk and getting it into VR meant that we needed to come up with completely new camera systems.
We had to move the camera the same way in France as we did in Los Angeles. So we used custom motion control systems to ensure every shot was pinpoint accurate.
This project is a global release in 11 languages and dozens of territories. It has to work on every device, from VR headsets to social media.
Our visual effects team needed a lot of horsepower, and that's where our tech partners really stepped it up.
We had dual precision workstations for the graphic artists and double modular servers for the renderer, providing an incredibly powerful Windows-based pipeline. All of the technology, all of these new techniques, they enable the artists to create something special.
So from roller coaster rides to up and tell a story, using a single camera, not arrays, right? Using motion control, using green screen, using techniques that we've been using for ages. That's where we started, where people were like, well, you can't have the actor in the scene because this camera shoots everywhere. And I'm like, whatever happened to the notion of clean plates? Just saying. So I think that's where we helped along quite a bit. So everything that we put together in Skybox and Metal has moved over into After Effects and Premiere Pro, and it's part of 2018 already. We did a pretty good job. We're going to do better and better with time. The idea is to make it even faster and even easier to use, and then layer on top of it as we deem fit. But a lot of the work, short term, will be foundational. We need to make After Effects faster. We need to have some real sense of depth compositing. So these are tasks. These are huge tasks that we've done. But more on that later.
In Premiere Pro,
So, sorry, let me stop it right there, because I'm taking way too much time. What I'm going to do is download the product, take a look. They're easy to use. If you know how to use Premiere Pro, we did not introduce new UX or new UI. You know how to do a transition, you know how to apply a filter, it's drag and drop, play around, you're done. That's it. If you understand After Effects, you'll quickly understand the Skybox, the immersive tools rather, very, very quickly. What we did introduce is, we deprecated the VR player, which Metal was kind of known for. What we did at Metal is we had a player that displayed your content, played it back in real time on qualified systems, but we also exposed the desktop, right? We expanded on that now. So what we've done there, and I actually have a demo in the back that I can show you that, is we've abstracted certain portions of the timeline, brought it into the HMD, so you can just scrub, move back and forth. We'll probably expand that with like some simple color grading tools. The idea is spend another 15 to 20 minutes, maybe another half an hour on the headset, preview what you're doing, tweak it a bit, add some markers, saves you tons of time and effort, right? So that's what we did with what we call Adobe Immersive Environment. A quick lesson on that, I did early IMAX. Early first workflows on IMAX. And we did it on this wonderful little screen here. And you know that IMAX is not a little screen. Yes. So we thought we were so fucking brilliant. Everything was done, all CG, taking forever on systems back then. Put the whole thing together, watched it and said, this is absolutely, we nailed this. We're unbelievable. And then of course you have to go put it in context. Everything was wrong. I mean, everything. We had to start over again. So, point being, working in context and designing in context is paramount. I don't think anybody expects anybody to be in this headset all day, but if you can tweak, preview your content, make some decisions, you're very good. Photoshop, we got support for immersive in Photoshop. One of the things I really wanted to go back to what we were doing with the After Effects and Premiere Pro products is everybody tends to go modal. That means open up a whole new window and you've got new functionality and introduce new UX notions, right? So what we convinced them to do is we want it in context. We don't want a modal approach to this whole thing. So take this equirectangular asset, convert it into a view-based system, and then give access to the people, to the customers, to the tools in the layer-based system. So Photoshop does that. We announced that in Max. So it's very, very simple. Convert equirectangular to a view-based system. Point your camera down, do content-aware fill or clone or whatever you want, add a new logo, and your job's done. That's it. So we're going to try to get a lot more of our products supporting immersive moving forward and interoperability between a lot of the products. So we have this show every year called Adobe Max, and Adobe Max has this massive presentation on a huge stage. Half an hour of that is designated to what we call tech demos or sneaks. So that's half an hour, and we're allowed to show 6 sneaks. This competition is very, very real, very, very stiff. I kid you not, our CEO can't even encroach into that. That's an internal competition. It's voted internally. It's private. The 6 top projects make their way up. I'm very happy to say that 3 out of 6 involved immersive this year. So what you're about to see is 2 sneaks, and then I'll whip through the rest of this. So spatial audio. Anybody who knows me knows that that's near and dear to me. Audio, I think it's even more important than visual is right now. And I'd like to introduce Yaniv, who's one of our team members. This is something we've shown. This is a tech demo. It's not in the products right now, but it's exciting to me.
As a 360 video editor, I believe that audio plays a big role in creating immersive experiences. In order to achieve that, you need to go beyond stereo. You need to be able to capture and play back all the sound that surrounds you. You want to make sure that what you see and what you hear feels connected. Let's say I'm in a VR experience and someone is standing on my left and talk to me. I want to feel his voice coming from the left. But if I turn my head to face him, I want to feel his voice coming from the front. The technology that allows you to do that is called ambisonics audio. The problem is, oftentimes your 360 camera and your microphone are going to be 2 pieces of hardware, and aligning them at shooting time is going to be manual and an error-prone process, and you may need to correct this alignment in post. An ambisonic recording is just a WAV file, so let's open this in Audition to see how it looks like. So as you can see here, it has actually 4 channels. But it could go beyond that. The higher resolution your ambisonic recording is, the more channels you will have, which is actually way more complex than a stereo file. But more importantly, it doesn't tell me anything about where the sounds come from. And if we could interpret this data visually, it could really help me align it to my video. So let me show you that and show me the prototype. So what you see here is a boardwalk scene. And the video has been shot with a 360 video camera, and the audio has been recorded with an ambisonic microphone. And the first thing I want to do now is aligning my audio content to my video. So I'm going to play the video for a little bit for you. Okay, so the first thing I need to do to align my content is to find a visual cue, and the guy shaking his bike right there is the perfect thing in my scene for me to align to. But right now I need to rely on perception, but we have a great feature. We created this ambisonic visualizer that allows you to see where the sound comes from. So I'm going to activate this right now and we'll play the content for you. I'm going to pause and scrub a little bit. And as you can see, the guy shaking his bike is actually right here, right? But the sound is actually happening right there. So it kind of like literally shows you that it's misaligned right now. But the beauty really is that I can select my audio clip, and it's represented now as a visual sphere that I can manipulate naturally just by dragging around, and I can realign my content that way.
So this is very important. Anything that helps along, like anything we do in spatial audio, in my mind, helps any kind of multi-channel mix, even if it's stereo. So this is very, very important. This audio, one way or another, I want it in the products, and I'll do everything I can to get it done.
When's it coming?
Dude, that's pushing it. So, but what I hope to do is to introduce you at another session to that man in the back over there, Milton from waves.com. He's become a good friend, and they have some very interesting solutions. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Depth of field and depth-based effects and all that. Okay, we'll let them keep. Okay. Well, is a big supporter of stereo. I used to get screamed at by Facebook and Google why I don't promote stereoscopic production. And simple answer is, to me, stereo without depth is not enough of a return on investment. It was as simple as that in my mind. So you know what they say, be careful what you ask for? Facebook turned to us and said, hey Chris, big mouth, let's do depth. So we did. So I'll show you what we showed at Sneaks. This is 6th, the concept of 6th, and then I'll show you some of the depth effects that you could expect to make their way into After Effects and Premiere on the next level.
Virtual reality video is bigger than ever today. People are uploading videos to YouTube, to Facebook. They're showing films at festivals like Sundance and Cannes. Your kids are making videos in VR, and you don't even understand what they're doing. And the big question for us at Adobe is what's next? What's going to be the way that we engage with and interact with and create the virtual reality video of the future? And Project Sidewinder is here to answer that question. So let's hop in the headset and take a look at some footage. That's where I say goodbye. And here I am in San Francisco with a pretty standard VR video. There's the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm on the Embarcadero. On the pier here, we can see some grass, some rocks, some waves. And this is a pretty standard video. So, I can look around. Pretty cool. This was captured with a GoPro Odyssey camera and a Google Jump to stitch the video. And now when I look around this footage, I want to maybe I want to see this wall from the side here. So I'm going to try and come around to the side and take a look at it. But I can't really get a different view. Or maybe I'm going to try and kneel down a little bit. But I can't see a different view of the object in front of me. And why is that? Well, VR video is a fundamental limitation in virtual reality video. The camera sits in a single location and it records the scene all around, which is why I can look, left and then right. But if I want to move my head a little bit to a different position, like to the side, the camera is still fixed in the same location, and it doesn't record what the scene looks like from this other position. It only knows what it looks like from one position. So I can't move my head and see the change in the scene from a different perspective. So what can we do about that? Well, this footage is stereo, which means I get different views of my left and right eye for a sense of depth. And with that depth comes a depth map. Here we can see that depth map where every pixel encodes how far away an object in the scene is. So the concrete barrier in front of me is very close, so it's bright white. The walkway kind of recedes in the distance a little bit, it's kind of gray, and then in the back where everything is kind of infinitely far away, it's black. And this is enough information that we can use it to approximate what the scene should look like from different points of view. So we're going to go back to the footage here. And you see I'm going to move back and forth, and we still don't see any change in the scene until I turn on Project Sidewinder. And now, as I move back and forth, it comes alive. Now I can move back around here and I can see different perspectives. I can come around and see the side of this wall, like I wanted to before. Maybe I can go up and down a little bit. I can see the grass a little more. I can kneel down and see what it looks like right in front of me here. Yeah.
So, I'll play the next clip. No, actually, I won't play it. So, this is not full volumetric. This is a responsible baby step towards volumetric. I think one of the things I really liked about it is for all of the time and energy that we put into stereoscopic acquisition, stitching it and bringing it and editing it, I like the fact that depth added a little more dimension right off the bat. I like the fact that it felt a lot more comfortable because we don't stand still, right? The first level is we just do this all the time. We're always doing this all the time. So as you're experiencing in the headset, it just feels better and looks infinitely deeper. So that's where the stereo payoff is for me. I don't mind putting my time and effort into it as long as I get some kind of ROI. That was it. So please roll it. That's our data. This is the camera that Facebook is putting together. Facebook and Google are not camera manufacturers, as you know. They're trying to facilitate content creation for their platforms. So this is a spec. They will probably work with camera manufacturers to try to put this together. It's a very interesting camera design. It's 24 24 cameras in a sort of like soccer ball array. And the nice thing about it is that you're just getting more information to be able to generate depth information from. So again, I can't walk around Andrew and do this. And you'll see that basically the reason is here. You're not getting that information yet, right? You're including this. But I can get a very comfortable and richer experience as I'm standing, moving just a bit, feeling very comfortable and getting a rich depth experience. That was the goal. So as I said, baby steps towards volumetric. That was the thinking, and that's why we committed to it. At Metal, this code is moved over to Adobe as well, so it'll make it into the products. So seven products. We're doing depth estimation, so if you don't have access to depth via Google or Facebook or whatever, LiDAR, you can take stereo pairs and start to do some depth estimation for yourself and generate that depth map that you need. We're doing depth of field, depth-based masking, so even if you don't use it for anything else other than depth-based masking, it's in depth of field. It's a great tool to help production and to help drive narrative, rack focus, things like that you may or may want to do. Depth transitions are very cool. Virtual dolly, don't get excited. It's really limited scope. It's really virtual dolly. That's about it. And as the technology advances, we'll try to follow suit. This one's kind of cool. So these are the effects. So that's the depth estimation basically, and it just goes on and on. Here's depth-based masking. So you based on the distance, you don't need green screen anymore. You can actually key something out, do a background replacement. There's a virtual dolly plus the depth of field. And then so this is where Chris has fun. The next one is what we call volumetric fog. So this is me playing around in After Effects with one of the early prototypes. So volumetric fog is basically Perlin noise that conforms to spherical data. Okay, so it's very interesting. We've seen this effect before. Based on depth information, you can do white fog, you can color your fog. It's got some volumetric qualities to it or pseudo-volumetric qualities to it. It's all fine and dandy, but then here's where we always found an opportunity to just push the products a little bit more, right? So that's me playing with the viewer at the time, back then, the metal viewer, the player. So this is the opportunity in my mind. So what I'm doing right now is I'm creating, actually that was just the color, but what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna create a new comp, and I'm creating a color palette for myself. So this color palette can be static or it can be dynamic, okay? It's a pre-comp or pre-composition in After Effects, so you can animate it, do what you want with it, and then assign it somewhere else.
Can you create an alpha channel?
Absolutely.
With stereoscopic
Yes.
footage basically of this, so you don't need a green screen essentially to.
Can you
So
say that
here-
loud? Can you say that louder?
Sorry.
He wants to hear the explanation again.
Yeah.
Oh, let me go back. So what I'm doing here actually is, I'll scrub through it again.
The alpha channel.
So yes, that's depth-based masking. Basically, if I shoot the scene, right, and I have depth information, I can key around you. With
Using
that-
this technique.
Correct. Correct. The technique I'm showing you right now is volumetric fog, but watch where we're taking volumetric fog. So what I'm trying to emulate here is, I'm the viewer, I want fog from you beyond, right? So that's very simple because I've got depth information and I've got a sense of where you are in space. But watch what we do, what we can do with volumetric fog. That's the next.
Can I ask a quick
Yeah,
question?
sure.
Sorry, we're in the developer group. If I've been doing some experiments with volumetric video capture.
Yeah.
If you had multiple perspectives and you used volumetric fog to extrapolate.
You're doing photogrammetry. This is not photo.
But could you use it to create isolated elements and then use all of that to assemble a model after?
I'd have to see your process. I'd have to see what you're doing. I don't quite make the connection. They're slightly different. As I said, you're more in the photogrammetry world or videogrammetry world. This is two-dimensional image that you're sort of emulating depth, right? And possibly.
There is an Adobe white paper that does that actually.
That does what he's saying?
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying if you
from what a photogrammetry or
Yes.
The video.
if you can get a clean alpha channel.
or are you talking about but that's on moving footage, right? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, but the moving
Yes,
footage
yes.
is multiple perspectives over
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
so,
yeah. So you're right, but only with moving footage, not with stills. That technology depends on moving footage. It falls apart when the camera looks. So what I'm doing here, I'll scrub through it very quickly, is I'm creating a pre-comp with a palette, and then instead of just assigning a simple color, I'm assigning the palette to it. You'll see that in a second. And I go from regular fog to instant water. So these are the type of effects that you can do with depth-based information and a little creativity in how you build the tool sets, right? So, Act 3, the future. Wow. Okay, we know about obstructing the world. We know the headsets that don't quite obstruct the world. Both are very important to us. I think one of the things that I can talk about right now is if you have Creative Cloud, download and mess around with Dimension. We launched that at Adobe Max. I'm allowed to say this because I've been around long enough. Adobe's had some false starts in 3D. Is that a nice way to put it? In the past. This is not one of those. It's got a pretty interesting interactive render. It's got a physically based renderer. The interactive render is going to get a lot of love. So is the physically based render. It's based on V-Ray, by the way. At least one iteration is on V-Ray. There will be another iteration that is homegrown. That made my jaw drop, actually. I saw a demo in December. I want to know. So, headsets, where are they at now? We saw Magic Leap. We actually got a chance to see Magic Leap. Interesting stuff. The one that we don't endorse. We can't endorse, we're not endorsing this, but what I like about this, and I hope it pushes every other HMD manufacturer to do the following.
Okay, so in order to get a sense of what Avegant is trying to do, it helps to understand how light field technology works. And it comes down to how we perceive depth. If you hold something up in front of your face, for example, what you're seeing is the light that bounces off its surface and passes into your eyes from multiple angles. Your brain combines the 2D image from each eye and uses visual cues like the rotation and focus of your eyes to create a sense of depth. You'll also notice that you can really easily shift your focus from the thing that's right in front of your face to the stuff that's in the background. When you start looking at digital images through smart glasses or mixed reality headsets, you're usually seeing a flat 2D image with a fixed focal point. And when you've got a display matched right up against your face, it just doesn't feel natural. By using light field optics in its headset, or what Avegant calls its multifocal plane approach, Avegant says it's essentially cutting up the images in front of you into different focal planes and sending that light into your eyes. So when you go to look at different digital objects, it's supposed to replicate the way your eyes would naturally focus without a headset on. So right now as I'm looking at you, you're in focus, but the arcade game behind you is not. But if I were to keep moving my eyes back and forth, they're sort of naturally adjusting. And you're saying that when someone wears an Avegant headset, that your technology lets that happen sort of naturally. It doesn't feel like you're straining your eyes.
That's right. So when you try the light field technology, it should not only feel more realistic, it also should feel a lot more comfortable and natural for your eyes.
So, what was the line in Spider-Man? With great power comes responsibility. Okay, so when we did that Facebook deal and we started to look at depth information and started to live where I live usually, which is way too far in the future, I actually got overwhelmed. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I said, what the fuck did I just do by signing on this contract? It wasn't that we felt we couldn't deliver. It's the repercussions of this. Okay, so this is sort of explains the dilemma. That chart-looking thing at the top, you can call it energy, you can call it time, you can call it money. To me, it's a start date and a deliverable date. I like to refer to it as energy because that's the most valuable resource to me, my energy in particular, and my teams. So we're working in 4K monoscopic, and a lot of our time is being spent stitching, moving assets through pipelines, and the ratio is looking something like this. Better for some, worse for others. Then we need to start looking at 8K monoscopic. Watch the orange bar, that's evil. Then we have to start looking at 8K monoscopic, and then we have to think about stereoscopic. And then we need to start thinking about depth, and then we really need to start thinking about mesh, and we need to start thinking about metadata, and we need to start thinking about containers, and I can go on, and that's that panic attack at 3 o'clock in the morning. How the fuck is metal doing this? No matter how well we did, no matter how, if we started talking to venture capitalists out there, the fundamental problem wasn't money. It's the brain power that's necessary to help circumvent this. So that brain power is at NVIDIA, it's at Intel, it's at Adobe, it's at Apple, it's at Microsoft, it's in a lot of places, and I don't think as much money as we could have attracted, first of all, we couldn't attract it in time. Secondly, I doubt very much that they would move over, because they're very comfortable where they are, and they're challenged in the best way, of course. So that's where that panic attack happened. So that's where, in my mind, I started to think, who's the ideal partner for this? And I thought it was good. And you'll understand why. So one of the exercises we start, so the thing that came to my mind is PDF has to evolve to VDF, or volumetric data format. Containers and standards and a whole bunch of things have to happen for this to move forward. That's a huge stumbling block, like monetization is a big stumbling block. And we'll get back to that little camera. Where's my camera? Okay, good. We'll get back to that, the rationale behind that camera afterwards. So this is why we started to work with the RGBZ format. It's actually not the best format in the world, but it does minimize that asset and empowers you as a content creator to say, I need full RGBD, which is full stereo pairs of depth and RGB for certain use cases, but hey, I may be able to get away with a lot here in some use cases, right? So that's the thinking that started that. So the products will support RGBZ to start with, and they will support RGBD later on. Okay? So the volumetric data format will serve company-wide. Creative Cloud, Experience Cloud, Document Cloud, it's overarching, basically. We have 4 products supporting immersive to date. There's a dozen that I can get into the fold that I think will make your life easier. Dimensions working interactively with After Effects is one idea. Character Animator coming into the fold is another great idea. It's basically bringing as much of these tools that you already use into immersive in a very easy to use way.
Does this exist? VDF?
Dimension, yeah. VDF, no, this is Chris's Madness. Much like that thing that you saw as Chris's Madness over there in the corner. Yeah, this is Chris's Madness. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of partners coming together, talking about a lot of interesting things, and hopefully the result is that. And that's you. And we also need a lot of you at that table talking about these standards, helping figure out what these containers look like. If you've been involved in a big shop and you have a TD at your disposal, or if you're inclined, this is fairly no-brainer stuff to you, but a lot of the smaller shops don't have access to that. So how do you represent all of these data sets in a way that even the mom and pop shop can understand? That's a hell of a challenge in and of itself. So I'm very happy to say, and that's another part of the dilemma, being little metal. We got a lot of respect. We got a lot of attention by Facebook, Google, all the major players, including Apple. Yes, Apple spoke to us directly. But we couldn't be the steward of something like this. That's much more something for Adobe to take on that kind of role. Plus, you get their attention. I say Chris from Adobe versus Chris from Metal. There's a little more weight there. Not much, but a little more weight. So VR as a subset of VR, VR 360. I know there's a lot of people, there's a divided camp on this whole VR 180 thing. I have to say I got very angry at Google when they launched the spec as it was, and they're sort of introducing it as this only format in and of itself. That wasn't what I fought for with them or with Facebook. That's not the way we saw it, at least at Metal, and I kind of share that opinion with a lot of people at Adobe. Current budgets, you can only really produce about 4 or 5 minutes. I find it very hard to solve 4 to 5 minutes, even if I had the most robust platform and deployment system in the world. If I can get closer to half an hour, I'm closer to monetization. If I can empower you as a content creator to say, in half an hour, what part of my story really needs to be 360 and what can be 180, then I think I'm doing you a big service. So this is why the format, and I think we're all moving towards that, is VR 180 is a subset of 360, basically. So I can take with similar budget, go from 5 minutes to 15 minutes to 20 minutes, maybe even half an hour. I don't have to stitch the damn thing, right? There's everything else that's not in the way of that, basically. Sports is a great industry for that. They love this kind of stuff. I don't have to mention the other one. So the future, you know what, I'm taking.
So do you support VR 180?
We're going to support it.
You will, but not quite yet.
Well, Metal actually supported monoscopic 180, even in version 2 of the Skybox products. So now Facebook is very interested, very, very, very motivated. So is Google. I think we're at a point where Adobe will address this as well. So on a very positive note, I know we've heard some negative things in the industry, Viacom Next shutting their operations, a couple little things like that. This was important. This is a Sundance piece that just sold for 7 figures, which is very, very good. Excellent. This is another piece. I think what I pulled away from Sundance is that the content creators are starting to find their stride and starting to tell better and richer narratives. This is an excellent piece that I saw as well. They did very well and will continue to do very well. I just found out that the Alienist is going to go to VR experience as well. So this is good news. A big company like Turner moving that way is a very, very good thing. And this segues beautifully to 2 amazing content creators. Mr. Andrew, who's going to go first? So Andrew McDonald, remember here. Andrew was. And this is all Andrew's fault. Andrew's with Cream VR. They did some beautiful work in the past. They've been customers and friends for a while now, early adopters. Andrew's partner, Tristan, is a wonderful designer, compositor, animator. And I'll leave it to Andrew now. Shut up.
So I'll blaze through this quick because I'm not trying to sell my company, but this Cream is a production company. We're out of Toronto. It's been a television production company for about 15 years. My background is a shooter, actually. I was a cameraman. I shoot Discovery, History, Travel, Nat Geo, that kind of stuff. And about in 2015, building cameras out of bike sprockets, I went and talked to Dave Brady, who runs Cream, and he was very interested in VR, and he decided to open up a VR department as a subset within his television production company. So those are the 2 bosses. My department is myself, Tristan, who introduced me to Chris, and we have another guy now. We got a director of VR Dev, so we're huge. These are some of the shows that Cream's famous for, or known for, particularly Wild Things. The first piece that we did was Agnes Die, which was a tribute to Hitchcock. It was what we used that bicycle sprocket camera build for, and I just took the Janet Leigh getting stabbed in the shower from Hitchcock's film and just recreated that as a VR piece. The interesting thing is that particular camera cost us about 10 grand to make. We had some of the first Intania lenses that came out of Ken's factory in Japan, and we hacked GoPros ourselves and we taped it all together. And yeah, it was about 10 grand worth of stuff to build. Now I can walk into a Best Buy or a Future Shop and buy a Samsung Gear VR, and these things for a couple of $100. So that's so then we got into building cameras. These are the various different stuff that we're using. This is the thing about as content creators for VR that's challenging, and I think Chris was hitting that in the end of his presentation. It's just there's just so much. There was like 2D and 3D, and we got 6 DOF, and now we've got like making avatars and volumetric builds. And as content creators, it's like it's only been like 5 minutes. It's like we're just figuring out how to tell some stories in 2D straight VR, and we're already moving on to 6 DOF as the tool sets to use. So it's a bit tough as on the creative side to keep up with all of this. Like, I mean, a lot of the pieces we've done, we've just honed a technique of doing something in 2D, and we're never going to do that again because now we're moving on to like something in 3D. So, and it shows with like even the cameras we're building, right? I mean, look at that one, the Ozo, they don't make it anymore. So we got into production. We got it was good timing for us because we had television production already happening. Like we were doing some shows for Discovery, and we started shooting some VR with our new cameras that we built behind the scenes, just as Discovery Channel had launched their Discovery VR. Discovery made a sort of a power play in VR and built an app and did some investment. And then they were doing it all in-house, and then we were making some stuff, and they saw it, and they were like, hey, this is kind of better than what we're doing. So here's some money. So we actually got paid to make VR in 2015. Yeah. And so we were bringing it out and doing sort of ancillary content for existing properties that we were already shooting for on television. So that also includes a piece. Actually, I'm going to do a little bit of promotion for myself right now. Is we have an app, and all the pieces that I'm going to talk about you can find on the app. It's in Android and Apple Store. It's Cream Space Bar VR. So if you download that, you'll be able to see some of these pieces that I'm talking about. Yeah, so this is an example. Of the challenges of trying to take this tech that people are making and practically apply it. So, for example, these early cameras, these GoPro rigs that we were sticking Intanio lenses on and jamming all together were great, and we were figuring out the stitching and getting nice clean stitching and what have you. And then when we tried to okay, now for the storytelling, we want to move the camera. Try and move that camera. How are you going to go? Oh, now I'm in the shot. So how are we going to do that? And then if you move it, these early cameras, if you didn't move them as slow and as precisely and as carefully as possible, the stitching starts to fall apart. So this was one of the solutions we did for our piece on the Civil War. We were doing this big epic thing for Smithsonian on the Civil War. It's like a 2-part series. Like I think it was 2 hours each, 4 hours total television. And this particular thing, they gave us some money to do a VR ancillary content, and we looked at what we were shooting that year, and one of the things was these were the very first trench warfare that happened during the Civil War. It was around Petersburg, I think. And we had this massive trench set that was built up in north of Toronto. And I thought, perfect, that's what we'll do for VR. I could put the camera in the trench, and everybody has to take 10 feet back from the lip of the trench, and now the whole crew's gone from the shot. Because that's another challenge of making cinematic VR is like, where do you put your food truck? Because people have to eat too. So in this case, what we've done is we got a dolly, we got just a big long jib arm out, and hung the camera down and ran this parallel track to the trench. And then we could have a dolly grip, just push the camera, and we floated through the trench and did the whole story. Again, that you can see on our app. It's called Blood and Fury, I think. And that's a white screen. And so then we moved on to a piece. I'm going to show you a video next, but this is our next piece was for Hulu. So we managed to catch Hulu's Play for VR. They have a VR app now on Hulu VR, and it was actually the piece that we did was paid for by Microsoft, and it was sort of launch content for their new MR headset, mixed reality headset, which isn't really mixed reality, but it's another story. So we got some cash in them, and what we wanted to do, and this piece is actually the thing I'm most proud of. Again, this is the piece that we did. I'm telling you, these are the cameras we use, but I'll tell you the piece we did first. Again, it's on our app, and I'm going to show you a little behind the scenes on it. And we wanted to do a Cosmos-style science show, like something where we could talk about the grand concepts of space and time and all these sorts of things. We have a host that we work with quite often, Dominic Monaghan, who's he's a hobbit from Lord of the Rings. He was in Lost. So we've worked with him before, and he's very keen on VR. So we managed to get him as a host, and he actually looks. We're actually doing photogrammetry models of his head right now, and I'm looking at him like, yeah, he definitely is a hobbit. So what we were going to do, maybe the next slide will be more helpful. Okay, there's our set. So what we were going to do, we wanted to shoot him in 3D. And we're basically putting him if you've seen Cosmos, it's pretty much all built in a computer. It's Neil deGrasse Tyson standing in his spaceship of the mind, and you've got everything sort of CGI. We're doing a similar sort of thing. So we needed to shoot Dominic in 3D and then put 360 set extensions around him completely. So what we were doing was putting him in a studio and shooting him with stereo pair of cameras. So these are the Blackmagic Micro Studios. The reason there's two of them is, and Ola will find this funny because I was actually, the guy speaking next is the master of moving VR cameras. He's famous for the Etihad commercial, which was one of the first out the gate, and it's precision masterpiece. So what we were trying to figure out is how we were going to move the camera on DOM and then have that information so when we did our 360 set extensions that they all moved at the same time. And initially we were going back, I was calling him like middle of the night in Sweden going, how am I going to do this? And we were thinking I was going to put it on a head. If I could just record one movement, like the rotation of it would be fine. But we ultimately figured out, and using, we ultimately figured out that the motion tracking software now these days is good enough that all I need is enough tracking dots that I can figure out the move and solve it in post. I don't even need to use motion control systems and giant robots that record everything they've done. And with the help of Skybox Metal, it wouldn't have been possible because we needed to get all this stuff and marry it together, and that's where Metal came in. We were able to shoot. And the reason there's two cameras, this is geeky and weird tech stuff, but these are super wide eye trigger lenses, and these are more tighter 8mm lenses. Super wide we needed because we needed to see as many of these tracking dots as possible, but we found that Dom, our subject on the wide lenses, was very far away. So now we've got a tiny guy we're trying to key in. So we had the second set of lenses to shoot him tighter, and the first set of lenses to get more tracking dot information so we could actually put the two things together. It was a hack, and it almost didn't work. And we had deadlines, but it did happen. So, and then we ran into this, which was now we got to finish 7.5 minutes of 8K footage. So, I mean, as a funny side story, we had a company in Canada that had a closed network, fiber network. It's actually built by university, a render farm on this closed fiber network, but it started making too much money, and the university, using the government money to build it, couldn't start making a profit, so they had to sell it to a private enterprise. And they were a company that had never really run render farms before, so they were like, oh great, we've got a client. Okay, you're in, we'll just put a fiber to your building and you can get on our closed network. Well, then we discovered that we couldn't get a fiber to our building for like 3.5 weeks. And we had a deadline, so he basically stuck 4 of these in a truck and drove them to our office. And I was wiring them into the stove and the dryer plug and everything, and blowing circuits, trying to keep it running. So 14 days of 48 blades rendering, we came to finish this piece. So I'm going to give you a bit of the behind the scenes on that one.
This is the point of the morning where things kind of start a little bit slow, and by the time we get to midday, we're going to be ramping up and we'll just be racing through it. And then, by 4 o'clock, curry.
If we collected all the water on Earth from the rivers, lakes, oceans, everything, and form it into a ball, we'd get a water drop 860 miles or 1,380 kilometers across. We're talking about the different ratios of things on our planet, the amount of water we have on our planet, the amount of air we have on our planet, the amount of humans, the amount of other animals, just to show that we are just a tiny, tiny piece of what brings together our planet Earth.
So the Earth from now on, God, is 3 stories, probably.
Okay, once I can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all right from the pole.
Do something that's new for me, educational. You have a host that's like an MC that can guide you through a piece. And when you have a viewer physically engaged with it, it just leaves a stronger impression on the user and hopefully imparts that information in a more indelible way.
I'm obsessed with learning stuff. I'm learning more as an adult than I ever did when I was in school. So because of that, I like to inspire people, because for me it's so much fun learning, and I think people can get a huge kick out of it.
A lot of people are going to be excited about VR again. A lot of people are going to be getting VR headsets. A lot of people are going to be watching this show. So it's a bit of a unique opportunity that none of us could really say no to.
This project's been pretty cool. It's been very diverse, giving us a lot of freedom to explore really cool different styles.
We're at the cutting edge. We're developing techniques that there are no standards for. We're making the standards right now.
VR in general, content now has to rise up and carry us into the future.
Cream Productions has been around for over 15 years, producing cutting-edge, award-winning television for an international market. For Cream to step into VR, we bring that wealth of experience into our VR productions. Now we can actually take this past television into an interactive experience that allows people to live the science in a way that linear programming just can't do.
One thing that really stands strong about our piece is the host himself, Dominic Monaghan, great performer, really cares about this content.
That is right. Natural science is something that should be essential in our learning. And I think if people can get inspired by sitting down for 20 minutes and watching a show, I think it's a positive thing for everyone.
I'm sorry, Chris, that was the one that did not have the mention of metal in it that we added. I just realized that. Where was I?
I'm Canadian, by the way, I'm allowed to say it.
Okay, so, and then I guess what you did, same with your talk, we always talk about what's next. So, I mean, for us at Cream, what's next is we're moving into volumetric productions and not necessarily 6DOF, because all these cameras are top secret and we don't get access to them, unlike guys in New York and you and such. So, we've just gone straight on to creating avatars. So, our piece that we just did for Hulu with Dominic, we're really keen on trying to keep in the educational market. Like a series like Cosmos is my bag. I love that stuff. So we're kind of trying to force Dominic, a hobbit, into being a Neil deGrasse Tyson. But our next piece is we're thankfully Dominic's still engaged. He's a very he's kind of like the uber nerd, and he's very into this stuff. So he's still playing ball with us. So we're building him as an avatar now. So we have just spent the past 2 months basically getting a nice model of his head, and we're working on this potentially new technique of doing a video projection of his performance onto his face, onto a model of his face, like a retopologized low poly model of a face like that. So these are the kind of things that excite me these days. This work, not so much like trying to put my VR cameras back together and go stitch some stuff. Like, yeah. So that's it. I blazed through it fast, but wanted to. And then I'll introduce Ola, who's again one of the masters at this early in the game.
So I'm going to talk about audio real quick, but I have two sort of tracks that I could go down depending on sort of the needs and desires here. See if I can write this at the same time as I'm talking. So I could talk about either human hearing and why, sort of how that is supposed to work or could work in VR, or I could talk about production for cinematic VR, things to think about when producing audio for cinematic VR. So those are basically the two. Can we get a show of hands for like human hearing and its implications for VR first? Oh, well, I need like 4 hours. I could talk for days about this.
You got a lot of time.
Okay, well, so the other side would be then production tips and tricks for, that's a few more. Let's do that side, okay. And we'll do it, there's gonna be, the chairs are for a Q&A after, so you could just holler questions later on. So you saw in one of the videos that Chris showed, the 4-channel ambisonic microphone on top of a GoPro Odyssey, the Google GoPro-based camera. That has 4 capsules that records first-order ambisonics. And the reason to put it on the camera is obviously that in cinematic VR, you're not necessarily placing a camera, you're placing a person, because whoever's watching will inhabit the depicted space. You're not imagining yourself into a rectangle, you're inside of it, so you want to listen from the point that you're viewing, so you place the microphone there, because if you have a microphone elsewhere, you'll be hearing from the wrong perspective relative to what you're seeing. So that all makes sense. But I will argue for why you should also always have other microphones and probably rely primarily on other microphones. So discrete mics on each performer, if you're doing that, or whatever is making sound, and other microphones for ambience and so on. And that is because the microphone at the camera can't do justice to what you would hear if you were truly there. You don't have that dynamic range in a camera, in the microphone. Well, and you actually don't have it in the camera either, So visually, you're not going to get all the details. We have limits in our resolution. We have limits in our frame rates. We have limits most certainly in our dynamic range for the cameras. And we also ultimately have limits in the display that we play it back on in the headset. But the same is true for audio. We can't capture it so that it sounds the same way. So by relying on a single microphone at the camera, you are going to limit yourself. You're never going to be able to lift an individual sound up a bit more in the mix and so forth. So because of the limitations, I strongly advocate for recording each and every performer and everything you can with discrete mics, so lav mics, for example. And if you're shooting something, so you saw some motion control examples. So for example, if you're shooting it in multiple places, you're not shooting omnidirectionally, you're free to use boom mics and so on. And we've done that in the past. Because if you're not shooting omnidirectionally, that means there is a behind the camera, and you should take advantage of that for audio as well. Because when you have everything as its own individual source, using a future tool like what Chris showed from Adobe that helps you align that, or if you just do it the old-fashioned way, just nope, yes, until you go insane, which is how it usually goes, you can then position all the sounds individually, and you can help craft the experience in a way that you couldn't if it's all ambisonics, and you can also get much better spatial precision than you get with ambisonics. So first order ambisonics is 4 channels, second order is 9, third order is 16. 4-channel ambisonics, first order ambisonics, doesn't give the spatial precision for audio that human hearing has. We are much better at hearing the origin of a sound, sort of exactly where it's coming from in an imagined sphere around us, than the capture of an ambisonic microphone. Then there's another thing about ambisonics. There's a lot of processing, again, referencing something Chris said, when you're taking a rectangular projection and turning it into a cube map or any sort of reprojection of a video, it incurs a lot of distortion. There's a lot of stretching and mashing of pixels, and your picture becomes soft and it doesn't become universally soft. There's certain areas that are worse affected than others. The same is true for audio. The sort of re-massaging of audio that needs to happen to take first order ambisonics or any ambisonics and render it binaurally is just this huge number crunching thing. And while someone who's only studied the math formula will claim that this is mathematically correct, well, it's going to sound like ass, and that's all that matters. Which is why vinyl still sounds good even though CDs measure better. I'll fight anyone who challenged me on mine. So there's a lot of like drawbacks around that, and then you can get into things like, well, why don't we record with like third order ambisonics? We can deal with 16 channels of audio. If we can deal with all the video data, surely we can deal with some extra channels of audio. Well, first of all, there's no mathematically correct way or no physical way to construct a mathematically correct third order ambisonic microphone. They can't physically exist because of how the capsules need to be arranged. This has to do with speed of sound, which is not infinite, which is a problem when you're doing that. But then you can get other types of like eigenmics, and you can get all sorts of crazy solutions, but you're never getting away from the fact that you're not hearing things at a distance the way human hearing does. And then there's something really cool that's called the cocktail party effect. This has a fascinating Wikipedia article as well. Like if you're in a really crowded party and it's just so loud all around you, you can still decide who you hear. Like if you just close your eyes and listen, it's just mayhem. It's just this sort of wall of voices and you can't make out words. But if you look at someone and focus, you'll hear what they're saying, which is crazy. And that has to do with how we take in spatial cues of how sound bounces around in the environment. It has to do with just reading lips and how we focus on what someone is saying. It's about contextual perception of what they ought to be saying, and we're making guesses based on that. We're looking at the body language of people around them and so on. There's all these things that goes into it. And it also goes into like how we're selectively filtering based on the very precise precision of the source of the sound. And you can't do that if you're playing back sound that doesn't have that same spatial precision. So suddenly the cocktail party effect becomes impossible in VR, unless you get your sound precision up way further. And you can do that if you have everything as discrete sources. You can record everything discretely, and then you map that to where it ought to come from in your equirectangular projection or whatever model you use. So that you could track it so that it moves. And this is good actually with tracking, even before you get the fancy tricks that Chris showed from Adobe. There are really, really good trackers now. Like Andrew pointed out, like you don't necessarily need like motion control data. You can just latch on to some pixel in your picture and track it as it moves. If you do that, you can take that data and export it in a format that allows you to import it in your audio mixing software and attach that same movement to an audio source so that moves through the scene, and suddenly they're matching. This isn't super smooth yet. People are making all sorts of like Apple scripty hacks to like convert between the two, but like the principle's there, and we're going to get tools that do it automatically. There are really good trackers and obviously Adobe products, but whatever you're doing your visual composition in. And you should be working in an audio workstation that allows you to assign tracking data externally, or to import tracking data. I also want to talk a little bit about, well, actually, before we get to that, I want to mention music, but before we're going to get to music, I want to talk about how you filter these individual sources, because the microphone at the camera will hear things also, not just the sounds that reach that point, but how sounds have bounced off of the environment to reach that point. So it's acoustically correct as sounds sort of arrive at it. But if I mic someone up with a close mic that's way off camera, and then I mix that in, they're not going to have the reverb and the sort of sonic properties of that. Like a super dampened room is going to make the sound more dry, or you can imagine a bathroom that's sounding very different. And a closed mic is just going to kill some of that, and suddenly they don't sit right in the mix. What you do is called an impulse response, ideally an ambisonic impulse response, which sends out a frequency sweep from a speaker in the environment that you're shooting in. You record that with an ambisonic microphone. That allows you to construct a reverb that is exactly a convolution reverb, that is exactly the properties of the physical space you were in, that you can then apply to your dry sound sources so they sound like they actually happen in that space. And then you place them spatially relative to the camera, and you adjust the space in the reverb so they now sound exactly like they would have in that space. If you don't do that, it's just not going to be believable. And one thing that's super important about hearing, the one thing I'll sort of slip in around human hearing, is that we're really, really terrible at intellectualizing what we hear, which is why music exists and even works, because music is just emotions that we pour into our head, and we don't filter it at all the same way we do with like visual inputs. And that unfortunately has the side effect that when audio is just not quite right or not believable or just something's off about it, most of us actually aren't able to say what is wrong, or we don't even realize that it's audio that's wrong. We just think it's kind of shitty and like, it didn't feel right, and like it's just this feeling. So getting audio right with all of these tiny spatial cues are super important. And also, like, if you were blind and listened to this, based on the sound of my voice, you'd have a decent idea of the size of this room. So that is essentially like how we sort of verify that what we're seeing and hearing aligns. And if the battery in your smoke alarm at home is going out and it makes that annoying beep once every 30 seconds and you can't figure out what the fuck is doing the beep, what you do is this, right? You're like, wait, what? That is an instinctive thing that we all do when that happens. And that is because we want to alter the distance between our ears and the source of the sound for each repetition so we can triangulate where it is. We're doing echolocation. We're not exactly bats with this. We can't like fly in the dark, but you know, there's a couple of DNA strands left from our common ancestor. So getting the spatial cues and getting this sort of the sound of the space right is super, super crucial for immersion, and that is ultimately what we want to achieve in the medium. So that is something you should not overlook at all. Now I want to talk a little bit about music and this stuff. Because you can mix things into some of the audio formats. And this is a sidetrack too. There are so many different audio formats. Videos like, is it H.264 or H.265? Sometimes VP9, but you don't usually need to care about it. Like, that's it, and you're done. And then maybe the projection model. But audio formats, there's one for Facebook, there's one for YouTube, there's one for Jaunt, there's a bazillion. They're all different, and there's one for Hulu, there's one for Samsung VR, or there are multiple for Samsung VR actually, but not the best ones. So it's a mess. So you need to pick what you're mixing for. But some of them, like for Facebook, which was originally called Two Big Ears, a company they acquired that I'd worked with a long time before then. So all our licensing fees for the software was wasted because then Facebook made it free. But good for those guys. They allow for a stereo pair in their overall mix. It's a multi-channel format, so you get the sort of spatial mix, so you get where everything's coming from, externalized outside your head. But then there's also a regular stereo track that doesn't change depending on your head angle. And that is useful for music and for voiceovers, essentially. What's called non-diegetic audio, so audio that doesn't belong in the actual scene that is depicted, while diegetic audio is what sort of lives in the scene. The issue with non-diegetic audio is that in VR, it basically just tells you it's not real, because where's it coming from? Well, it's obviously not behaving like any of the sounds. So an entirely voiceover-driven piece can work, I will say. So what was the name of it, Chris? Awavina, something? Yeah, but actually both of them are entirely VO-driven, which is really interesting. And to me, that works when it is VO-driven. But when it slips in and out of VO, so it's diegetic sound and suddenly there's a voice in your head and then it's coming from the outside, for me personally, that sort of undermines immersion a little bit. And that brings me to the other non-diegetic audio, which is music. So music in VR, I mean, music is used in film and TV as this emotional companion. It takes your hand and says, let's go over here in the emotional landscape. And it works. It's the whole industry, and we all like Hans Zimmer, and it's all good. But when you start to try to pluck the emotional strings in VR, it very easily turns into shredding the emotional strings, because you're so sensitive to something that is just coming out of nowhere when you're trying to feel like you're inhabiting the space. When we're not suspending disbelief and imagining ourselves into rectangles, we function very differently. So to me personally, and feel very free to disagree, but in most of the pieces that have a lot of cinematic style soundtracks in them, that takes me out of it. That sort of undermines it to me, and it sort of reminds me emotionally that I'm imagining myself into something, that I'm being told something rather than experiencing something. So I think subtlety in that is really useful. And if you can, see if you can mix the sort of harmonies of music or something like that into the actual sound world. So it belongs in the world a little bit more. Not necessarily all of it, but you could take some of it into that. I'm going to leave with one sort of trick too, in this sort of crunch mode run. That one says 12 seconds. And we'll do Q&A too. But one trick is, you've probably noticed this, especially on Gear VR, when you're looking, if you've looked at a lot of video-based content, and you're plugging in your headphones, you can't quite get it loud enough. It's often not loud enough. You might max it out, especially in a loud environment, especially headphones that are slightly heavier to drive and things like that. That is because you're having a lot of different channels in there, and the final mix is happening real time, because the final mix is a function of your head orientation relative to time. So where you are in a timeline with all these channels, and your head orientation will adjust how loud each channel plays, you need a bit of headroom so that you don't accidentally get a head angle and a combination of audio tracks at a specific time that causes clipping. Because digital clipping is super nasty sort of distortion. So which is why everything is sort of dialed down a little bit, but then it doesn't go loud enough. And what uses the most dynamic range is bass. You need more decibels of bass to have it sound as loud as mid-range, for example. So, but the trick that I'm gonna give you now, if you're ever mixing for this kind of stuff, is that humans don't have spatial hearing for bass. We don't hear where bass is coming from. Is my dryer still going, or is a truck idling outside? We don't have a really good way of telling where bass sounds are coming from, which is why in a 5.1 system, the 0.1 is just a single subwoofer. It doesn't matter because it's just gonna hum and it's there. So you don't have that type of orientation given certain frequencies. So take the bass out of all your spatialized audio and put it in the non-diegetic channels in the non-track channels that are just going to play, because you can sort of offload that and then maximize your other channels and get away with a bit more loudness in the mix. So, that was that.
All right, so we're gonna take, oh yeah, theta.
Yeah.
We're gonna take a 5-minute hiatus, so everyone stand up, please, stretch, throw your hands, and then we'll have all the speakers back up for Q&A.
All right, thanks so much. It was really interesting. So I have a question more for the green projects, the bigger ones. Do you have heat maps on where people are focusing?
Told you
And
this
the ones that, especially the larger production projects, are they still focused on the 90-degree, or are they actually spending more time?
Oh, do I have the heat map data on how people
Yeah,
watched
that's what
it?
you've been looking
I
at.
believe our app, which is built by
Yeah.
Hello? Check.
Hello?
Our app, which you can download on your phones, is built by Liquid Cinema, or no, Liquid Cinema. Yeah. Anyway, it has heat map functionality. Never looked at it. I mean, to be, it's great that it's there. It's just that we just don't have the volume of people on the app right now to even have any metrics that'd be worth looking at, right? I mean, that's the thing with VR is it's still like nobody sees it.
Yeah. Well, so even the bigger projects, like the Hulu type stuff, and then like the bigger ones.
Yeah, well, the Hulu project, that was put out on Hulu VR and on the Microsoft MR headset, and if I phoned them up and asked them for the heat map data, they would laugh at me. It's like, it's not, networks won't tell me that stuff. They won't tell you your things to hit in case they want to make it, and then you're gonna go, oh, well, it costs this much, you know what I mean? Like, the networks won't give you that info, so.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the short of it is, yeah, the data's available on our app. I just don't have enough people on the app to look. I should look it up, but I'm just busy.
It's okay.
Okay, next.
Chris, can you talk about Mantra and Mantra Live?
Sure. So I have to take my Adobe hat off now for a second. Mantra is all about stylization for 360 VR. It's extremely fast. It's node-based in After Effects, believe it or not. That's what I was trying to allude to with a lot of the developers. We've got full support for HTML5 panels. So there's a lot you can do. I'm actually talking to my friend in the back here about that. There's a lot you can do about taking very, very complex notions and making them extremely easy through node-based systems. So we did that. It's available in After Effects and Premiere Pro. And what I've been toying with and what we were showing in the back to some people is we took all these effects and we've got them running in real time in an HMD at even as high as on qualified systems, of course. I always have to say that. But we'll support 4K stereoscopic in real time right now. So the thinking there is that becomes more of a VJ tool set than it is a professional tool set. Although what we might do is we might record your actions. So you can be creating abstract sequences, doing what you want to do with that, and then moving that data over to After Effects so you can refine it, because the code base is shared, basically. So it's just an interchange of data. So you start to look at creating in a new way, right? Where it's more performance driven. You feel more like a conductor than anything else, right? So it's interesting that way. Where I'd like to take that product, I can't do it personally anymore. I sort of put out a roadmap for the team at Metal. Nancy's driving that effort. They're doing wonderful work. The idea is currently it's doing real-time audio reaction. If you're familiar with that, it's basically sample a piece of audio, a frequency of audio, and attach it to some visual properties. That's been around forever. We're processing that in real time. But I want eventually to turn that on its head so that as you're manipulating visual data, what happens to tempo? What happens to pitch? What happens to everything else on the audio side? So it becomes a new way of creating content. Some say it may be chaotic, but I argue that a piano is chaotic too. As soon as you parameterize and start to put rules around it, it starts to make sense. So this may not be for everybody, but I'm very keen on evolving things. That's what excites me.
Sounds like a synesthesia simulator.
Yeah, very much, yeah. But as content creation too, right? So, the physical act of sculpting, the physical, bringing all that together and sort of feeling more like a conductor. So it's performance, music, and art coming together in a symbiotic relationship. Cool.
Could you use like Mantra as a tool for pitching as a standalone? Or would
Yes,
it be part
it's that, we have that in the back as an alpha.
Oh, okay.
So the idea is you can put any sources, any audio sources, feed them in. You can tie in any visual sources. We have it decompressing every form of codec I can think of, and that's much more expensive, by the way, to work on than real live streams. So you can connect a 360 camera to this and affect it in real time. That signal is then projected to a 4K display, but the thinking down the road is that we also have bidirectionality with applications like on your iOS device and Android. So a big part of it in my mind for VJ and event type driven stuff is getting bidirectionality with the audience. So for example, I'm the VJ, I'm doing this wonderful thing, you see it projected on a big screen, but I ping your phone and I relinquish control to you as an audience member.
Huh. Are you in chat with the SAT in Mantra?
No. No.
Okay.
Sorry, we don't like VCs, we don't like government bodies, I'm sorry.
I don't know, I have good friends there that would be interested in doing something.
If they are cool, yes. I mean, cool.
They're
like,
musicians.
I like musicians. I like musicians.
I have a question for Nicole. How important are customized HRTFs for for the importance of really perceiving spatial audio? And then do you think within the next 3 to 5 years, people will be able to put their own custom HRTF algorithms so that like spatial audio actually works for your unique head?
Really good question. And so I'm going to first do a sidetrack because I was so excited to talk about audio. You can maybe deduct it from this email address, but so I work at Here Be Dragons, which is a production studio for VR, and I'm also a co-founder, partner, and technical advisor for Within. But my day job is Dragons. So HRTFs, head-related transfer function, that is a mathematical description of the acoustic properties given to a sound depending on its incoming angle relative to your head, essentially. It's a mathematical model of your hearing. And so this was the sort of track I now didn't do based on the show of hands for my mini talk, but when you hear a sound, there are three basic areas of three ways in which we deduct where it's from. One is that the amplitude, so the loudness of the sound becomes less on my left ear in this case, because there's an acoustic shadow of my head, so it's lower, and our hearing can detect that, and thereby figure out that it's probably coming from the right side. Then there is the time difference, the intraoral time difference. Again, I mentioned the sound moves kind of slow, so sound will reach this ear later than this ear. And the exact angle of this, like here, it's this exact same to both ears, and then more and more delay until it's maximal delay right out at the side. We have really good spatial precision in this, and we're talking milliseconds or sub-millisecond precision in how well we can detect these delays. Our hearing, our nervous system, and how we interpret hearing is fantastic with this. We have the amplitude difference, we have the intraoral time delay, and then we also have the spectral shift. And this is where HRTFs really get into play. So spectral means frequency. So the sort of sonic shadow of my head is not just making the sound lower, it makes the frequency content of the sound different. My head dampens certain frequencies more than others. And also, the incoming angle of the sound hitting my outer ear, which is called the pinna, it reflects and bounces off of this. The reason this pinna is not symmetrical, it has a direction, that is how we can tell this from this, and even this from this. Like I'll hear something from below me, even though it reaches the ears at the same time, it's got the same amplitude in both ears, but also clearly hear that it's from below. That is because I can recognize its snapping fingers, but its snapping fingers filtered in a way that I, over my lifetime, have come to identify with coming from below me based on my specific shape of my outer ear. This is like a fingerprint. So the HRTF data set, that is a set of information that says if a sound is at any sort of point around me, it should get this time delay, it should get this amplitude delay, and it should get this spectral shift, so the sort of an equalization curve to the two ears. That is what the HRTF data set is. Now that is adapted to some sort of, in a VR headset when it's rendering audio so that you hear sound through headphones as though it's coming from outside of your head. Normally headphones make it sound like it's inside your head. When it's rendering so that it's coming from outside your head, it takes a sound source and applies the HRTF changes the filters to it. That HRTF data set is modeled on some sort of average person because it's baked into the system playing the sound to you in that VR experience. So for example, Facebook's TBE format has one data set. Google's has another. They recently changed, by the way. And the Steam audio system has another. So they're all different. But they're not yours. And there's even some scientific papers on how people in China are actually the least compatible with their normal European-derived data sets because they have different sort of geometry and different outer. So, to your point, the longest answer ever, but it's set up to the point. Individualized HRTFs is a way to have your data measured. And it's not just your head, by the way. The way sound bounces off our shoulders also matters. So if you have really broad shoulders, it works differently you'll hear this differently and or be less compatible with these data sets. Individualizing them is tricky. The value is immense. It's such a big difference. Some of the ones that are sort of generalized are better. There's a Swedish company called Dirac, D-I-R-A-C. They have a model that takes into account that when you turn your head, you don't rotate your torso. So shoulder reflections are in one way now, and all of these data sets assume that I move like this when I'm turning my body when it shifts the sound. But Dirac's set assumes that I do this when I turn my head. So now I get less shoulder rotation. So they take that into account, which makes a huge difference. You wouldn't think that sound bounces off your shoulder. It does. But then it's like the size of your head. If you have a wider head, that obviously affects the time difference a whole lot. So these things matter tremendously. There is some excellent work happening on deducting your personal HRTFs without placing tiny microphones in your ear canals, putting you in an anechoic chamber, locking your head to a pole for 2 hours and sending beeps to you. That's how you've been doing it forever, and it's just not practical. But you can now scan your ear with a camera, so it's basically doing photogrammetry with a cell phone, getting a 3D model of the ear, then running a simulation based on the 3D model, and that constructs an HRTF for your pinna. It's harder to do with intraoral time delay, but these things are happening. But then the next step is then to get these audio engines to support custom HRTFs, which in the case of Facebook, for example, is really possible because of how it's integrated. So,
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you get to such a granular level of fidelity and detail in calculating all this for sound and then deliver it through some shitty speakers on a headphone in your ear, what's the point?
So you can listen to music from a cassette tape and it's going to sound shitty, but it's going to sound even shittier if the mix wasn't good to begin with. It's the same idea.
Fair enough, but at what point?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Sure, but at what point it's just one little diaphragm speaker trying to...
Well, for that particular user, maybe it was pearls before swine, right? But not everyone will be the lowest common denominator. There's going to be, hopefully people care. So one last comment on that, Oculus Rift ships with these on-ear headphones that are actually better than their sort of individual component price betrays, but there's an add-on for Oculus. If you have an Oculus Rift, there are in-ears that you can buy. They're $49. They sound so much better. Now, in-ears get grimy, so it's not fun to share with everyone, but if you have one that you use privately, get the in-ears. Like that $49 makes such a difference for sound quality.
So if I can add to Ola, we hear more than we see. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here. We would not. Dinosaurs would have chewed our butt a long time ago. right? So one of the big reasons why, even if you don't have access to spatial audio authoring tools, I've seen incredibly well-done productions that are using simple panning techniques, but at the end of the day, it's about judicious sound design and great mixing. That goes a long, long way.
Yeah, to that point, hearing is our only 3D 360 sense. Oh, you just gotta be loud, man.
We don't even.
Yeah, I'll just use my outdoor voice. We can hear how far away something is in any direction around us. We have no other sense that does that in all directions at once. Our vision obviously is directional and in a different way.
You have a question?
No, actually, is it.
Okay. Any other questions?
In dispatch, there's not a lot of visual input. Like we're talking about, it's really like just lines, but the sound is so powerful.
Yeah.
Just
yeah. So dispatch number 5 there, which is I know is chronological and not a ranking, but so dispatch is something we produced together with Oculus. So it's a Jupiter Dragons project. It's available on Oculus, both Gear VR and Rift, and the upcoming Oculus Go.
And go buy it because it is one of the best things you'll ever see.
Thank you.
Mainly because it abstracts everything, and you have to use your imagination to fill in.
So that's what kind of mantra was about.
That's so powerful.
I said this at one of the NYVR. Somebody kept asking me, is VR or 360 VR an evolution of cinema or theater? In my mind, it's more like a dream, right? And in my mind, it's, my dreams are not within a frame. I can look around, do what I want. They're not linear. At least my dreams are not. They're abstract.
But you inhabit them.
But not only that, but I accept that.
Yeah.
And I have no issues deciphering and moving through that, right? So in my career, one of the things that I got very excited about, other than this stuff, is Pulp Fiction. Not so much that it's new, but the wide acceptance of a non-linear structure. I said, wow, it's at last, it's about time. So I'm hoping, when I say reinventing storytelling, I'm hoping we bring a lot of abstraction into it. And I'm hoping we look at the creation of it as more of a hybrid, right? Are you creating music? Could you take a more musical approach to this as opposed to a linear cinematic approach? Is storytelling what we do? Are we not ready to move on? I think we are. I really do. Agreed.
Following up on that question, talking about audio, you've been talking mostly about making audio as audio realistic as possible.
Yeah.
What are the things that people are doing now on the other side, which is stylistic, storytelling in a different way? Clearly, immersive VR, one of its attractions is that it's really being there. But then, as you say, it's also the possibility of being dreamlike. And what are the other inventive, different things you can do with audio that are not audio realistic, but audio stylistic?
I really loved Spheres. That was also in Chris's presentation. What was sold for a seven-figure amount, which probably starts with a 1, but still. Yeah, I think that was really amazing. It's real-time rendered project. It's about the sound that black holes generate through the universe when they collide with one another. And we can detect, we've now, in NASA and others, have detected these shock waves on Earth, like millions of years, sometimes billions of years after that collision happened somewhere else in the universe. But what does it sound like, as if wave sound in empty space, but like at that moment when the two black holes are colliding? This project does, I think, a really, really excellent job of providing a texture and an emotional guide for what you're experiencing that is obviously based on the abstract because no one stuck a mic into a black hole. I think that piece is fantastic. I'm not sure where it will be seen. I know it's going to be at South by. Director Eliza posted that to Facebook the other day. Yeah. So it will be at South by Southwest in Austin. I don't know where else. Whoever bought it for a lot of money will probably control that now. But if you get to see Spheres do it, I think that was an excellent use of audio.
And do yourself a favor. So I was asked by Intel, who sort of was involved in that. So Chris, what do you think? And I said, I think it's wonderful. I can close my eyes close my eyes, and it's just as rich of an experience, maybe even richer than what I saw visually because of the audio. The narration is first class. It really drives the piece forward, and the sound design is just impeccable.
Yeah.
Impeccable. That was the same assessment I had for the first Lord of the Rings. I was with a customer, he turned to me and he said, okay, Chris, we know it's gonna win a lot of awards. If you can only give it one, what would you give it to? Sound design. Sound design. So watch Lord of the Rings, the first one, again. It's incredibly well done.
Okay, maybe one more question. You guys can speak up in the back.
Yeah, just wanted to just broaden the conversation a little bit to different types of storytelling, whether it's like geospatial storytelling, which goes a little bit into MR, or the multiplayer VR that's coming out, and just maybe from the Adobe perspective where that falls in the roadmap, and then as from a creative perspective, Andrew, just where you see that type of VR fitting in the future.
Please.
Well, our latest project, where, as I mentioned in my talk, we're getting into building avatars, and we're in this particular case, it's continuing on the science-based cosmos kind of theme of our other piece, where you would have Dom as an avatar who would be a guide and instructor taking you through it. And we're going to be capturing a performance of our actor performing his lines and stuff. But then, for me, it's a whole new world of creation, because I'm learning things like pause poses. Like, I've got to have gaps where audience can interact with avatar, and avatar if then do this kind of programming on that. So, and then on top of that, we've discovered this new technique where we can have the avatar react to input from the users, as in, like, for example, if the user gets too close to the avatar, I can have the avatar have a bit of a reaction, like to this. So we're actually now augmenting the acting that Dominic's already doing. So for me, it's just a new palette. I don't know what to do with it yet. We're just like, oh, neat, we can do that. Let's try this. So we're just experimenting and seeing what can work. So
Yeah, if you're not experimenting, you're in the wrong medium.
yeah, that's the thing. Like, this is a game for early adopters. If you have to continually be an early adopter, because if you think you've early adopted it and you're ahead of the game, you're going to be like, oh, my whole model's crap and I'm broke. Yeah. So we're just staying ahead of the wave.
Not only that, it can't be theoretical, right? So I don't have an answer for you, and that's the exciting part, right? That's one of the things that draws me to this, is that what is storytelling when everybody's got an HMD here, we're all injecting different geometry and we're trying to share this experience. What's that like? I don't have an answer for you, but I mean, theoretically, I can probably try to answer it for you, but I'm probably wrong. Until I experiment, try it with groups of people, I won't know. And that's what I'm hoping to do at least this year and part of next year, start to go a little more hands-on. I'll keep doing what I do with, visiting everybody, but I want to be a lot more hands-on this year. It's the only way, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, one last round of applause for our presenter. Thank you so much. Amazing. Thank you, everyone.